Sometimes, a story doesn't have an ending. It just stops. No warning, no reason, and no rhyme. You're living your life, routine, familiar, and then, in an instant, nothing. Just a void and darkness. And when the story picks up again, you're somewhere else. Not just in place, but in feeling. Everything looks different, feels off, and you can't explain why. For you, it was just the blink of an eye. But for everyone else, it was a year. In 1978, a college student named Steven Kubacki went skiing along the edge of Lake Michigan. He didn't come back. Not that day, and not the next. Weeks passed, and then months. And then, 15 long, silent months later, he returned. Alive and alone. Hundreds of miles from where he vanished. With no idea where he'd been. With no memory of what had happened. Like the world had swallowed him whole and quietly spit him back out. No one could explain it. Not the police. Not psychologists. Not even Steven himself. This isn't a story with a solution. It's a void masquerading as a mystery. And maybe that's what makes it so terrifying. Hope College sits quietly in Holland, Michigan, a small town pressed up against the icy breath of Lake Michigan. In winter, the landscape turns stark, quiet and grey, as if the world itself has fallen into a deep slumber, waiting silently for the thaw. Steven Thomas Kubacki was 23 years old, a senior, studious, and a little introverted. He studied German and history, ran cross-country, played the guitar. But more than anything, he liked solitude. The kind of silence that most people find uncomfortable. He found comforting. On February 20th, 1978, Steven drove out to Saugatuck, a small coastal town not far from campus. He brought his skis, a backpack, and a journal. He told no one. For him, it was routine and normal. The weather that day was calm, almost unnaturally so. Locals would later describe the air as hollow, the natural sounds toned down, as if the landscape itself was quietly listening. Steven set out along the lake sometime around noon. He skied a few miles along the shoreline before veering inland toward the dunes. He paused often to write or sketch. His journal, later recovered, contained a strange line. "I can hear the ice breathe." He wrote about how the lake cracked and shifted under its own weight, like something alive just beneath the surface. And then, near dusk, he stopped, removed his skis, took off his backpack, and walked, barefoot, out onto the frozen lake. No coat, no compass, just footprints in the snow, leading away from the edge and into the white. When Steven didn't return that evening, no one was immediately alarmed. He was known for being independent, quiet, a little solitary. It wasn't unusual for him to take time for himself, but when he missed class the next day, and then the day after, concern turned to worry. His family contacted the police. A search team was sent out to the area near Saugatuck, where Steven had gone skiing. It didn't take long to find his car, still parked neatly near the trailhead, dusted with snow. His cross-country skis stood upright, planted neatly in the snow, as if he had every intention of returning. Just a few feet away, his backpack rested untouched, partially buried beneath a light drift of wind-scattered snow. But what came next made the scene unsettling. A single line of footprints trailed away from the gear, leading out across the frozen surface of the lake. No hesitation in the steps, no signs of doubling back, just a straight path that continued across the ice, and then stopped, as if the ice itself had swallowed him whole. Like a door had opened in the lake, and Steven had walked through it. Authorities launched a full-scale search. Tracking dogs were brought in. Divers cut through the ice. Helicopters scanned miles of shoreline and open lake. But there was nothing. No disturbances in the ice. No blood. No body. Steven Kubacki had vanished, leaving only his footprints behind. Weeks passed. Then months. The official theory was drowning. But something about that conclusion didn't sit right. Not with the people who knew him, and not with the investigators. The ice had been thick and unbroken. There was no indication of suicidal thoughts, no evidence of mental instability. He had simply vanished. His family, after exhausting every hope, held a memorial, and the case was closed. For the family, Steven's absence was more than just someone not coming home. It was a quiet, constant weight. His presence, once part of the everyday rhythm, was simply gone, and nothing felt quite the same. 15 months later, on May 5th, 1979, a man woke up in a field in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, over 700 miles from where he'd disappeared. He was barefoot, disoriented, wearing clothes that didn't belong to him. He carried a satchel filled with random items, maps of cities he didn't remember visiting, travel brochures, odd little objects. That man was Steven Kubacki. With no sense of how he got there, he stumbled toward the nearest house, hoping for answers. By uncanny coincidence, it belonged to a distant relative of his father. When they opened the door, they didn't just see a confused young man. They saw someone who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Steven told them he had just woken up, had no idea where he was, and couldn't remember how he got there. In his mind, it was still 1978. He thought only a day had passed, but in reality, 15 whole months had passed. Doctors were called, tests were run. They looked for signs of trauma, head injuries, substance abuse, anything that might explain what had happened to him. But there was nothing. No bruises, no scars, no signs of malnourishment or exposure. Steven was, by all accounts, in good health, remarkably so. His beard was neatly trimmed, his nails clean. His clothes, though unfamiliar, were in good condition. It was as if someone had been caring for him, tending to him, during the 15 months he was gone. But when pressed about where he'd been, Steven had no answers. No vague memories, no fragments, nothing. His mind was blank, like the entire chapter had been lifted clean from the book. Some psychologists suggested dissociative fugue, a rare psychological condition where a person, usually after a traumatic event, suddenly abandons their identity, travels without purpose, and later returns with no recollection of the experience. It was a theory, but there were problems. Steven had no history of trauma, no mental health concerns, no stressors that could explain such a break. And perhaps most telling, he didn't act like someone who had run away. He never sought attention, never sold his story, never gave interviews, except for one quiet comment, where he said that it felt like he'd been given a second chance and wanted to use it. Then he vanished again, but this time into a life of intentional obscurity. He completed his degree, earned a PhD in clinical psychology, and faded from public view. Whatever happened to him during those 15 months, he never spoke of it again. Almost like he was trying to forget it too. Theories emerged, as they always do. A carefully planned hoax, an episode of extreme mental breakdown. But none of them quite fit. There was no motive, no benefit, no prior issues. And then there were the stranger theories, the ones that whisper to a deeper, older fear. That Steven had been abducted, that he passed into an alternate reality, that he stepped through an invisible seam in the world and found himself someplace else entirely. Some point to the Lake Michigan Triangle, a region rumored to be tied to magnetic anomalies and disappearances. There's no proof, of course. But then again, there's no proof of anything. The only person who knows what really happened is Steven Kubacki, and he isn't telling. There's a particular kind of horror in the unexplained. Not the kind born from blood or violence, but something deeper, something quieter. It's the horror of disconnection, of suddenly realizing that the world you thought was stable might not be, that the rules you rely on, time, memory, reality, aren't fixed. They're assumptions, and sometimes they slip. You could go out into nature one day, following a trail you've taken before, with nothing out of place, and never come back. No warning, no sound, just gone. That's what makes Steven Kubacki's story so unsettling. It's not just that he vanished, it's that he came back, quiet, whole, as if nothing had happened, except something clearly had, and he doesn't remember a damned thing.